All right, everybody.
Happy Friday. So if you're here, could you please turn on your cameras? Okay, so we're going to continue talking about interviewing methods, whether we're talking about in-person interview or in-depth interview or focus groups. And so we talked about what's the purpose of focus groups, what the purposes are for doing interviews, how they are different in terms of like the topic that they're appropriate for, the size of the sample, what pros and cons does each one have. And so we're going to talk now about what they have in common, which are like the steps, starting from formulating the research question for the interview, how you sample participants, how you generate the interview guide, that is to say, the list of questions, pick a moderator, you recruit people, prepare the facility in which the interview is going to take place, conduct the interview, transcription, and analysis. And we're going to go over all of these steps in conducting interviews. So the first one, and this is true for any research project, is to identify what is your research question or what is the thing that you're looking for, right? What are you trying to find? And if you remember, we mentioned that interviews and focus groups are good to answer, are good for qualitative, so they're part of qualitative research, and they're good for exploratory questions. So if you have, for example, you want to understand like you have question about the student community, the gamers community, dealing with like online learning, the rise of online games. That's another example. So let's say you have a question saying, do gamers find a social value in joining virtual gaming communities? All right. And you don't have any hypothesis. Okay. So you're not predicting that they will have social value or not. You still don't understand what the social value is. You don't understand like what are the social connections being built within a virtual community game. And so if you don't understand about something, the first step you do is obviously you talk to the people in that community, right? And so interviews are always, as we've mentioned, or mostly, not always, but let's say mostly, for exploring new frontiers in research or things that the researcher is not familiar with and they don't have access to like a background information. So there's no past research being done on that topic, right? Um, how have your eating or like eating habits changed since last year? So this is like another exploratory question, right? We don't know, we don't have data yet into what like the changing in dieting or like food habits or eating habits that took place or like have been taking place. We're still met the this new normal that we are in. Um, and so since you don't have past research to rely on because this is a new thing, these type of question will mostly you do through interviews, right? Um, so that's as far as the topics go. For the sample, usually you pick how many participants or how many focus groups you want to include. You would see, and we're going to have an assignment on reading focus group research papers. Usually they would have 3 to 5 to 6 groups per study or focus group. And we said the numbers could, within each focus group could be 6 up to 12. If you're doing in-depth interviews, so the number of individual participants could be between like 15, 20, 21, 22, from that number. Some studies that like a long term could go up to 45 participants, so 45 individuals. Um, and it could be based on what we would call like voluntary. So it could be that people would volunteer or they could be nominated. Okay. Uh, so for instance, let me give an example. Ray, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so you said you are in what forces? I don't want to get it.
I'm a Marine.
You're a Marine, right? And so let's say, for example, I want to study people who served overseas. Okay, the people who like went to tours, like I don't know. So either they were stationed in some bases or like they went into like battlefield, let's say in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I am someone from outside the military community, and so technically it's not something, it's not a population that you would just see or like you could recruit easily. So it could be nominated because I'm looking for a specific criterion, right? So people who served out overseas. If it's done randomly, anyone in the Marines, or like even if I decide the criteria, I might not get into that specific group that I'm looking for. So I could ask someone like Ray or someone who works in the Marine, like, could you nominate some people who like fit that description and who are also willing to participate, right? And so nomination, so that's like for nomination. Volunteers, if you have something, if you just announce it, right? Like so, let's say around campus, I'm looking for people who fit that description. Please reply to this email if you're interested. And this is mostly for like general topics, right? I'm studying something about the student life or changes in like mood or reactions to different products. The more general the description is, or like the more easily you could find volunteers. If you have a specific criteria for participants, then most likely you'll get some. You'll go through nominations or like specific or very specialized recruitment agencies that could get you these people. They could be friends, they could be strangers. Like so, if you're a student, you could I think group project. Mostly you'll be interviewing friends. They and we mentioned this before, they ought to have shared background, demographics, psychographics, and the more the group has some cohesion, is the better your focus group would go. Do you remember why is that? Why do you want the focus group to be more homogeneous? Do you remember what is the reasons? Anyone? Remember threats to focus groups? What did we say? Or things you want to avoid in a focus group? Like what could go wrong in a focus group? Can someone tell me what could go wrong? Do you remember we said?
If a focus group gets like emotionally charged, it can, instead of being like gathering data and analysis, it could be an argument and it'll just go back and forth.
Right. And so therefore, the more similar the focus group members to one another, the more likely that you would avoid that situation, right? But then the problem is that you would then, right. So you would then, you would then have different focus groups. So instead of doing 3 focus groups, you would do, let's say, 6. So you could get more like homogeneous group within each one. So you're always limited by logistical restraints. Keep that in mind. So there are things we say like ideally what we want to do, and then there's reality. If you're a researcher, like you have a time limit, you have limited amount of money, and you have limited resources or space. So you might like need to sacrifice something, right? So there's always some compromises. And so then you would create what we would call the moderator guide. So it's called a moderator guide for focus group, an interviewer guide for an interview, which are so for in-depth interview, it is the same thing, except that for moderator guide, you would basically, so it's basically the list of questions. So the moderator guide is the list of questions, but you also write down instructions for yourself, or like if you hire a moderator, so instructions for the moderator. That is to say, it would be things like pause for 5 seconds after asking the question, or like here, like stand up or look around the room. So it's like there are some techniques that people use for moderating. So like the pauses when you interject, you write down, for example, the follow-up questions. So if the participant said this, I will stop them and say that. So you write down different scenarios of how the things could go. It could be as detailed as you want them to be. Sometimes you need to keep it short. So it depends on your style as a moderator. And so you make sure the moderator guys, what they need for, like you make sure that you address all of the questions. And you also add some notes about how to make the focus group more productive. And we're going to talk more about this when we talk about the moderator themselves. So yeah, like when you control like regression, so you have that down like some notes. You explore new paths that emerge. Also, you leave that. So the guide would have open-ended questions mostly, and then sometimes you would have close-ended questions. And so this is like close-ended questions. Sometimes when you're trying to start a new topic. So let's say you ask, we're talking about online games, different online games. So how many of you play Fortnite? So that's like a close-ended question. But some people said yes. You would then add some open-ended questions like, how do you feel about Fortnite? Okay. So we said in interviews and in focus groups, what we like is, do we like open-ended questions or closed-ended questions? Which one do you prefer in interviews?
You want closed-ended questions so that way it sparks a debate, or not a debate,
Yes.
but
Conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah. You want open-ended questions. So it's like, because when you ask, do you like Fortnite? Yes or no? That's it, right? Like, what do you like about Fortnite, or what do you hate about it, or like, how do you feel about it? Like, how was your experience with it? Like, there are different answers, different perspectives that could engage with one another. And so you start in, so it's the interview guide. So you start with the broad questions on the top, so in each subsection. So let's say I have one about playing, let's say, shooter games. So that's section. So I start just from the broad, like, what games do you play? Or like this one I have right here. Do you like Fortnite? And then, assuming I'm doing research on online gaming, I would then add specific or narrow question about specific features in the game. So at least I need to have some background about what the game is like. What do people spend on it? Like the different customization options. I could ask about very specific things, but I need to do my homework basically and look at these different games, right? So yeah, you start from a broad question to spark a conversation. Then with the members, you can get into the nitty gritty. And you maintain neutrality all the time. So you won't take the Fortnite side or the, I don't know, PUBG side if you're taking online gaming, or like if it's sports, so you don't take sides. But so you make sure that you maintain neutrality. And by the way, speaking, I'll go to this later, but let me explain here. So two things. Sometimes neutrality could be violated just automatically or naturally, just like your natural reaction as an interviewer. So for instance, let me ask you a question. Like what is the most, how to put it? What's the most exotic place you've been to? However you're defining exotic, or like the most exotic, or like exciting place, or unique place you've been to.
Costa Rica.
Okay, who said that?
I said that, Santiago.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then, like as an interviewer, I could say, "Wow, that's great." Okay, so that's like a natural reaction. Oh, Costa Rica, like it sounds great. But so, assuming, for instance, the recent destinations, and we want to compare like different tourist experiences, I should not show bias, because if I do that, I could then sometimes cue the interviewee to focus, let's say, on the positive things and not the negative things, right? So when let's say you went to Costa Rica, and there are like good things you remember about it, like, but also negative things. But when you tell someone about something and then they show like very positive reactions, like, "Oh my God, that's great, tell me about it." You don't want to disappoint them, right? Like you just say, "You know what? No, it wasn't actually that great." Like people would try to like mitigate that a little bit. And so neutrality, that's what happened. Like, so it doesn't have to be something like about like extreme. It could be just that natural thing. Like you smile too much, or like you show your happiness or like fascination when somebody's talking. I'm talking here as an interviewer, not like as a in a normal conversation. Uh, an interviewer must keep their neutrality. So even if you're excited, like anyone, like you also want to stick to the script, quote unquote, just to make sure you're having a more neutral or like an objective treatment of the subject matter. Does that make sense? Right. So speaking of the script, so this is how like a script looks like, or like the moderator guide. So here, like this was about personal hygiene. So this research was like about hygiene regarding food preparation, as to like food scientists or like hygienic experts. So what are like the easiest and most important ways to maintain personal hygiene? What do you think of when you hear the words food poisoning? Have you got sick from homemade food in the last 6 months? Do you consume canned food? If yes, how? So you could see all of the questions are open-ended. So do you consume raw milk? If yes, how? So how would made it an open-ended question? Here, for example, how do you store eggs, fresh fruits, and vegetables? So it's more like, again, exploring. It's not, the question isn't like, do you store eggs in your fridge, right? Or like, do you store fresh vegetables in your refrigerator? So those, yeah, you want to make, so even if you have closed-ended questions, try to formulate them as open-ended questions, right? And as we said before, like these interviews tend to be semi-structured. So the guide is just like that, a guide. So it's not like a legal requirement. So you could expand and ask follow-up questions, even if they're not written. As long as like they expand the scope of the research, you can ask them, even if they're not written on. As so for the moderator, we already said sometimes you have a moderator and like one moderator, one note taker. Sometimes they are the same person. You start the focus group by introducing yourself. So I am Aziz. I'm a professor at the University of San Diego, and I'm conducting research on online shopping during the pandemic. And so thank you for participating. And we're going to start recording. If you have questions, you can leave. And then I could then read the consent form. By the way, you still have a consent form. Sometimes they're done verbally. So I could, and I've done this before. So you would read the consent form, like out loud. And then you would ask the participant to, if you agree to participate, please say your name. So there is also the researcher responsible. So remember the do no harm or cause no harm. So you're responsible of that also when conducting an interview. So who is, so let me, so an interviewer, like it's someone like, so who is a good interviewer? So basically it's someone who engages in active listening. So have you heard that phrase before, active listening? What's different between active listening and passive listening? You heard about it before? Or communication, maybe, other person. So you see what I'm doing here? Yeah, Santiago, you want to say something?
No, I was just gonna answer the question. You were talking about active and passive listening, correct?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
guess active. I mean, I would consider it as like you're actually involved in the conversation and you're talking and interested in what's going on and you're actually contributing to the conversation. Whereas passive, I think, is you're just listening to it kind of in a way, like it's there, you know, but you're not actually in the conversation.
Yeah, that's one good answer. Yeah, right. So active listening, yeah. So like about two words. So active listening, it could be like when I nod, or like when you show facial expression, or like even you say yeah, or like just showing that you're listening, you know, just with like eye contact. So it's mostly nonverbal, and or like that's interesting, and then so it's the idea is like your body language communicate to the participant that you're listening. Passive listening, if you're just sitting there and people can have no idea if you're actually interested in what they're saying or not. Okay, so that's passive. You could be very well be you could be listening, but when people sense that you're not listening, then they tend to share less. Obviously, that's true of interpersonal communication, informal communications, and formal. Um, Personally, okay, let me ask you, just from, I'm sure you've watched multiple TV interviews or what qualities, just you subjectively, what qualities do you think define a good interviewer? What qualities do you like in an interview?
Um, this experience, like you want someone that's experience of like what you're being interviewed for.
Oh, you mean so the interviewer has to be experienced with the topic?
Yeah, like you wouldn't want someone interviewing you that has no idea what they're interviewing you for. Like,
Hmm. But what if that was the point, right? So remember when we said about the exposure research? So the example I gave with you, so yeah, I'm interviewing people who went to like mariners who went overseas, and so I have no experience with that whatsoever. So can I conduct that interview or not?
so you want to know, so you're asking me if you want to know how many, or like if like how many Marines have been deployed overseas. Like you want, like you have no idea. I mean, yeah, you could.
Yes, I want to know about the experience. So I have no, and I want exactly to hear the experience because I don't have that experience. So that's like that's the point. Um, but my point is that's a good question. That's a good yes. So that's a good issue. So if I have no experience or a subject matter, then what should I do if I'm conducting an interview with someone?
Just be prepared.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. The quote from the yeah. So be prepared. Right. So what does preparation entails? Like, what should I do?
Like do
What would you
research.
do?
I would do research about the topic and then know what questions I want to ask beforehand.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously there are many books written about the Marines, the former mariners, like officers, like different ranks. There are different news stories. So you have some background. So whether we're talking about, I don't know, the Marines or I don't know, the women basketball team at USD or like online gaming, at least familiarize yourself with the language, right? Like major concepts, the issues that they might face. Okay. And so when you're conducting an interview, they might say something, so at least you have an idea what they're talking about. Because I'm sure in each subfield, there are technical terms that only people in that field would know, right? So at least know the basics. Always prepare yourself before you start. So yeah. That's yeah. What about, so here somebody's saying, let's see, please say, yeah, someone with good energy. What is the good energy to you?
Someone
What
who
feels
doesn't
like good
have
energy?
like a bland voice and good questions. I need someone who's excited to actually interview me to know that my time is being worth something.
Yeah, and that's a good one, right? So like good, like someone is excited and of the opportunity that you're giving them 1 hour or like whatever time of your time to do an interview or to sit with you and give you an interview, right? Because if someone is not showing that so it means they're not showing appreciation, and or maybe they're just doing it because I don't know, it could be a task they have to fulfill, but they're not genuinely interested. And so these things people could sense, right? And it would affect their participation. Being non-judgmental, that's a big one. And it's especially it could apply to things like, if we're talking things like about addiction or even online gaming, right? So someone tells you, yeah, I spend 6 hours a day on online gaming. You cannot show like a disapproving reaction to that. Like you could say, oh, that's interesting. Like why or when did you start to do that? What do you do with different games? Tell me about like what do your family members think about it, right? Those type of things, right? And sometimes it could be for things we don't notice. So, and I think I mentioned this before, but I personally, I study luxury. I study luxury consumption, like what they call conspicuous consumption or luxury branding. And sometimes, yeah, like you interview people and they'll talk about their spending habits or why did they decide to save money and spend on that $4,000 bag, right? Uh, so you cannot show, oh, this is ridiculous. You cannot say that. It's an interview. Again, the point is not to have your point of view, but to have the point of view of the participants. So you try to take people's perspective, try to show empathy, or like try to like why they did that. Why would someone pay $4,000? A college student, even a college student would spend $4,000 for a bag. Like what are the motives? What could be like the environment or the factors that led to that. In focus groups, to try to be even-handed if you get into come to like an argument. Be aware of real-world issues, and this is important. So, and this happened like in front of me, but not to me. Sometimes we discuss let's say, online learning. And in some places, you don't have, let's say, equal access to technology. So I would assume, for instance, maybe, and here I'm only assuming, like the majority of you grew up having a computer in your household, or even more than one computer device, right? Maybe even you had one when you were in elementary school. But people come from different backgrounds, and there are people who haven't owned a laptop since they became college students, right? And so when we discuss, when you ask questions about, let's say, like how you're dealing with Zoom or like technology during the pandemic, you have to be aware of like the real world issues, the real world inequalities, right? So when you ask questions, you're sensitive in your understanding. So yeah, and then there are other things like good memory. So when someone asks something and then you go back, oh, and this reminds you of what Mika has said, blah, blah, blah. And so you connect the dots. You have observational attentiveness during focus group. You build rapport with the group and all of that. And so that's a step. We won't spend a lot of time in recruitment, but basically, something we would talk about more when you get into like what is research, the idea of sampling. So for focus group and interviews, most of the sampling is pretty much non-random. So that is to say it's subjective. So you're specifying characteristics that would be considered appropriate for your research. So folks are like, I want like student athletes. Okay, it's non-random. I want people in the Marines, so it's non-random, right? Example, I'm studying people who recovered from COVID-19, right? So we're talking people who just had like mild or critical cases, people who experienced hospitalization, people who were like in IC units. What exactly? So this is a pre-specified because I'm looking about, again, focus groups and about like a group perspective, and interviews are about individual perspective. So it's perspective of someone who's different than you, right? Local, like a non-random person, people with unique characteristics that are related to your subject, research subject. So that's the recruitment. So the recruitment could happen via like personal connections, targeted advertising, this type of thing. So it's mostly non-random. And then you would draw in people with incentives. So mostly you would offer money, like $15 an hour. I personally think it should not go below the minimum wage. That's my opinion. Other researchers might disagree and they would just award like $5 and maybe some refreshments. So that's the first movement. And then the facility, you would have something like a focus group room, a place that is professionally as comfortable. So like comfortable seats, the table. If you're conducting an interview, you could be like in a casual place. So just a regular room, a coffee shop, outdoors in a park, depending on the issue of privacy, to be honest. Make sure no one interrupt you in the room, right? So if people are there, no other people can just come in and out. In focus group, you would see people maybe with name tags, which would help then people talking to one another and helping you as a moderator remember the name. And it would be like the table would be like set out like this, so everyone could see the other, right? So you won't stand, it won't be like a classroom, right, where I'm standing here and then I have rows of people. So it would be like a round table, so all of us could see one another. So the point is, when you're conducting a research interview, keep in mind it's not a job interview. So in other words, you have like a semi-casual setting. So you can stand up. So the moderator is actually encouraged to stand up, walk around the room. You could laugh. You could joke a little bit with the interviewee, with the subject. So you make things less. If things get more intense, so you want to lighten the mood a little bit. You can have refreshments, candies, coffee, those type of things. Anything that makes the participants comfortable, because when the participants are comfortable, they are more comfortable in sharing. And then when you conduct the interview, always we say like you would have a recorder, you obtain permission. Sometimes you have a note taker, and you paid, and the note taker would pay and we mentioned this before, would pay interest to the body language and like sensitive language. So that's like keywords that you had in mind. Like for instance, example we had last time we talked about the experience of students with remote learning. And so you could tell the note taker, like whenever someone mentioned words like isolation or depression, pay attention to like the faces of the participants, right? Or like the other emotional reactions to that sensitive word. Like, so you could, the note taker could pay attention to specific topics or specific words to focus more on when it's being mentioned. Because sometimes, you know, when you give an answer to something, people could talk about different things and not give you like a substantial answer. You know, people digress and they talk about one thing, but then they end up talking about another thing that's actually not related to the research. And so the note taker could just ignore those type of like side conversations or like fluff and focus on more like keywords specified in the moderator guide. And then when we said, so when you conduct the interview, we'll have something we would call probing question, which we mentioned like things you ask to elaborate. Could you please clarify or confirm? Let me do a fun exercise. So Miley and Josie, how long have you been together as like roommates?
Just this semester.
Just this semester?
Yeah.
Have you had like another roommate before, or like is that the first time you have a?
Yeah, we both had different roommates freshman year.
Okay. Wait. How did you find your roommate?
How did I find Josie, or how did I find my other roommates?
You can elaborate. Whatever you want to, however you want to answer.
I found Josie through the LLC class freshman year.
Okay. And did you like that service?
I think it was really good and helpful in meeting people.
What's helpful about it? So like the time or like different people?
I think just like the community that's built through it, and like having an advisor to help you with academics, but also just having people that you can rely on in the class.
All right. Okay, thank you, Miley. So that was like a very short interview. So when you ask questions, don't ask like close-ended question like yes no questions. Like, did you use that website? Right? Like when you ask, for example, like, did you like it? Ask instead, what did you like about it? Right? Like, add what did you like about it? It's different than we say, do you like it? Like different, like, did you find it helpful? Like how helpful it is, right? So these proper questions that you add. So even if you have like a close-ended answer, so yes or no, you can then add something so people could elaborate. So yeah, you can get a lot of things when you conduct your interview this way, right? Something I learned the hard way, silence is key in interviews. So in interview, you ask one question, and then if you just, keep silent, and then look at the interviewee, people would tend to respond, right? Because there's that sense that it is all psychological. People want to avoid that silence. They'll keep asking. And the other reason is that people try to collect their thoughts, and so especially if you're conducting, especially when people know, so this is going to be a long interview, right? So people want to say something. And also because it's for research, and even if it's not published and people won't never know your name, that or that the fact that you participated, people like to give smart answers sometimes, or like elaborate answers or elaborate answers. So they will take time to collect the thoughts and like answer. So silence is always key. Like leave some some pause for sometimes. Let the interviewee prepare mentally in order to answer. Also, really something true for all interviews. Never read from your guide, right? Never read. Just try, like look at it, uh, look at your notes, and then answer. Ask a question, sorry, while keeping an eye contact. So these are like some and use open-ended questions. So these are like some of the techniques for that. Here are some additional examples for probing questions. Like, can you tell me more? Could you explain that in another way? Do you think that's always the case? Right? Does anyone have a different perspective? This is more for like a focus group, right? Can you elaborate on that thought? So yeah, this is final, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but when you read papers, people would, so the research would tell you why did they conduct like 8 focus groups instead of like 10. There's something we call information saturation, right? Do you know what saturation mean? What do you mean when you say something is saturated? Like it's like what? You know, saturated, saturation. So
Like-
saturation means something. So something is, yeah.
No
Yeah,
new
go ahead.
is given.
Yeah. So saturation being filled up. So so saturation would mean no new information is given. So let's say about finding a roommate. Like so, I asked mine about the experience. I asked Josie, and then I asked like 2 other people, and then I asked 20 other students, and then I asked like another 10. So by the time I reached to the student participant number 30, I kept hearing the same things, right? So I heard about like the good things, bad things, like the community, the prices, the pros and cons of having a room, everything, right? And no new perspective is emerging. At that point, we say we reach the point of separation. That, in other words, there's no point of conducting more interviews because I've already heard an opinion. So you can think of different topics. So if we conduct a study on the experience with remote learning, right? Like I could have, if I only interview 2 people, let's say, I could have totally different perspectives, right? So they could share nothing at all. If I interview 5 people, maybe I will start to see some commonalities. 10 people, things will start to converge. Like I would see what people agree upon and then like the differences. 20 people, like higher conversions, right? 30 people, mostly 30 people, like I would get at least. I'm talking here about within one community, right? 30 interviewees, yeah, probably. And I'm guessing, yeah, like you would basically get the general perspective or like the main themes that unify that team. Right? So that's what we'd call saturation. Like so, once answers become repetitive, that means like you're reaching saturation. So yeah, this is another example. so ways to ask like which is better. So here about clarifying questions. So assuming I want to ask, why did you? So I'm doing research on running shoes. So and this is gonna be the last slide, by the way, for today. Why did you switch the brand of your running shoes versus what is unique about your new brand of running shoes? Or like what's unique about your new running shoes? Which question do you think is better, A or B?
Maybe B.
Why is that?
Because it's asking more or less like specifically what is unique about the brand. Potentially someone can
Mhm.
give more information with that question.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I asked what's unique. So the things about the question, this is a good point. The thing about the question why that it is hard, right? So why did you decide to have a like to look for a roommate? Like, do you mean why financially or why socially or like why I decided in the first place, or do you think are you asking why about that specific roommate or like having a roommate in general? The question is why is hard, right? Why did you choose to come to UC? Like, okay, there are very like a lot of factors and people, especially if you haven't thought about it before, it's hard for you to answer. But I ask you, what attracted you to UC? Okay, or what attracted you about the communication studies program? So what did you like about it? Have you considered other universities? What made you see different? Like what made it stand out? Like what made this program unique than the other programs? So things like that, right? So so the broader the questions are, like how let me say like the more vague or more broad they are, the harder it is to get a concrete answer from people. The more you specify to them what you're expecting to hear, the better it is from them and for you to get information. So that's it for today. And we're gonna basically wrap up this thing on Monday, hopefully. And then we do some of the activities. Do you have any questions? All right, so if that's the case, see you next week, and I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.